What's up, guys? I'm Amber, this is Amber Online, and today we're going to be talking about summer movies. So I'm back. You may have noticed I was gone for all of August. I decided to take August off making videos, not because I was on vacation and I was away, but more because everyone else in my lab was on vacation, and I just kept working 10 days in a row and then 10 days in a row again, and I was sleepy, and it's, a small amount of work to edit videos, so I didn't want to do any additional work. But now I am back to talk about some of the summer movies I saw while I was off on my mini hiatus thing, and yeah, I'm pretty excited. So first up, obviously the big summer movie from Marvel, Guardians of the Galaxy, came out, saw it a couple times. Fantastic film, really enjoyed it. Great humor, great emotion. I think it was an excellent portrayal of the comic books. Obviously, they weren't spot on with everything they did. Yondu springs to mind. The Nova Corp wasn't really well explained. Ronan wasn't quite in his traditional role within the Korean Empire as far as comic books, but I think, unlike a lot of Fox movies, perhaps, maybe, throwing it out there, this stayed much more true to the spirit of the comics. It felt more like a high-flying adventure comic book movie. A lot of people have said this felt like how a Star Wars movie should have been, because it was just full of heart and full of great actors, and really all the actors, I think, pulled it out in this one. The directorial direction had very little interference from the studio, it seemed, and that was great. Batista, I was surprised that he did an excellent Drax. The way they used Drax as a very literal character came across well. I don't know if that was because of actor limitations or because of directorial choice, but either way it worked out really well. Changing his origin a little bit to make him an alien, that's cool. A lot of fan nods when he says things such as, Thanos is the real problem, because we know that Drax's purpose in the comics is to destroy Thanos, and, Ronan was just a stepping stone for him in the film. That was well done. The character interactions, the building the relationships, the Rocket Raccoon, even by Bradley Cooper, funny every time he was supposed to be funny, heartwarming when he was supposed to be heartwarming. They did a very good job of establishing just sort of a tragic backstory for him without being too heavy-handed about it, just when he's getting changed in the jail and you see the modifications that have been made to his body, things of that nature. They did a great job with this film. I was a little disappointed by the extremely heavy reliance on body modifications for, everything. Everyone was cybernetically altered, and that's why they could do what they could do. It wasn't necessarily because they were aliens or because of who they were, but just, this person had these implants, and this person had this implant, and Yondu's mohawk was an implant instead. But those are minor quibbles, and overall the movie was fantastic. Super enjoyable film. I don't need to go into big details, I think, explaining a lot of what happened in there. I will say that for people who haven't read the comics, Peter Quill's dad is not in the film. So if you're still at this point guessing, who it was, or was it, was this guy his dad? Is Thanos his dad? Is Yondu his dad? Is it like a Luke Leia thing with him and Gamora because they're No, his dad does not appear in the film. As Yondu mentioned at the end, basically they had been sent to pick up Peter Quill when his mom died, because his dad was obviously going to collect him at this point when his mom could no longer take care of him. His dad never appears in the film. We can assume, I guess, that the subject matter of who his father actually is covered in the next movie. I'm not going to tell you now. If you really want to know, you have Google, right? I don't want to spoil the next film. No spoilers. That's new for me. Next thing I saw was the film adaptation of The Giver, directed by Philip Noyce, based on the book by Lois Lowry. The Giver was a book I really loved when I was a girl growing up, as well as the sequel books. If you have not heard of them, they're The Messenger and Gathering Blue. Gathering Blue is first and then The Messenger. They're sort of tangentially related books that happen in the same world but aren't necessarily directly sequeling The Giver. So you should check those out as well. Definitely read The Giver. It's super short. It's like a 2-hour read, but it's a very thought-provoking book. And I think, while the movie hits all the story beats, certainly, and it is very faithful to the plot of the book, it isn't necessarily faithful to, I think, the emotion of the book. Now, this could also be me looking back as an adult at the perspectives that I had when I was younger and just sort of skewing them a little bit through the window of time, which, I've done with movies like The Polar Bear King, which I thought was amazing, and then watched later, and I was like, oh my gosh, why? No, it's still kind of amazing. Anyways, back to The Giver. This was a book that I read when I was younger, and it was the first sort of dystopian future book that I really got into, and so it was a very disturbing book for me because a lot of the subjects that they deal with in the book are sort of the dark side of humanity. So the premise of The Giver, if you haven't seen it or haven't heard of it yet, is the idea that in this future society, there's been, of course, as always happens with dystopian societies to lead them to this point, there's been a lot of war, a lot of destruction, a lot of horrible things. So we come out with a society wherein they have decided to control all of the emotions, all of the strong, evocative images, and everything that could cause a human being to feel too strongly, to the point of drugging them to suppress their emotions, but to the extreme point of taking away the collective memory of all of humankind, of everything that is passionate in life. Both love and war and color and beauty and everything has just been like sucked out of society so that people can lead these sort of calm, complacent lives, and in so doing, they've of course taken away what really makes us human. They've kept us alive, but what life are we really living? And that's sort of the idea that when the boy Jonah receives these memories from the former receiver, who becomes the giver, who is an individual that keeps all of these memories in order to advise humanity on how to proceed since they've lost so much of their history, he decides that this is no way for humanity to live, and he wants to redistribute the memories to the people. So this is all, as I said, done very faithfully to the plot of the book. Jeff Bridges does a great performance as the giver. He's a very emotionally impactful character. Taylor Swift shows up as a failed apprentice, and actually has a very good moment with Jeff Bridges that I enjoyed. Meryl Streep plays the only character Meryl Streep seems to get anymore, which is like a stern older woman who knows best but doesn't really. By and large, casting was fine. It was fine, but it wasn't great, and that was, I think, my problem. That the book was great, and the book was really, really disturbing and really thought-provoking, and the film just sort of watered down those elements. I won't tell you everything that happens that I found disturbing or that I found thought-provoking about the book or that sort of opened my eyes about the book, but I think in the film all these elements are present, but they're a little washed out. They're a little less impactful. They're a little less edgy, and I don't know if that's because they're trying to appeal to a broader audience, or because books can get away with more than films, or if it's simply that your imagination is a little harsher than what they show on screen. But it all sort of boils down to the fact that I would rather read the book, even though there's nothing specifically wrong with the movie. And quite frankly, because it's such a short book, it takes about the same amount of time out of your day to watch the movie or read this book. So you might as well just go read the book, and then read Gathering Blue, and then read The Messenger, and just enjoy some Lois Lowry. And then if you really like those, see the film adaptation, I guess. So lukewarm about it. So lukewarm. I'm like the people in the book about the movie, because, I have no passion about it either way. And of course, I saw Expendables 3 because it came out, and you can't not see an Expendables movie when it came out if you were born, between 1980 and 1990, because those are all the action heroes of my childhood together on screen. It was exactly what I expected it to be. It was just extreme, ridiculous action with, 6 dudes fighting an entire country's army, and you're like, alright, I believe it, because Stallone is leading them, and Schwarzenegger is helping them, and, Mel Gibson is the villain, and it's fantastic, and it's Wesley Snipes is kicking everybody's butt, and it was, Antonio Banderas is still flipping around, which I do not know if he can do anymore, but his stunt double did a great job. So it was a super fun movie. It was very, very thin on plot, and in fact, the plot was probably the weakest part of the movie because it didn't make sense. The premise for Expendables 3 basically is Mel Gibson, a former Expendable, is back, and he's wreaking havoc because he's scarred from his past, and he's kind of an evil dude anyways, so he's messing around with everyone. Stallone has to stop him, and instead of taking out his crew of tested and true Expendables, he finds and recruits a new generation of Expendables via Kelsey Grammer because he doesn't want his friends getting killed. And this is in the face of one of the Expendables getting shot in the awesome sequence that opened. Well, I guess the second opener. You know what I mean. The scene where he got shot. I won't tell you who. Spoilers again. I'm trying to be less spoilery, but ultimately I'm failing, so meh. So anyways, he decides that he's going to get this whole new generation of Expendables so his friends will be safe, and he forces them to retire. He's like, I'm not taking you with me anymore. So instead of having a bunch of old dudes that are seasoned and ready to die and sort of messed up and taking them out with him, he gets a bunch of people in their 20s and early 30s and says hey, I'm going to take you guys out to die instead. Which is a little illogical because they show him several times as a father figure to these younger Expendables, and so he'd rather take his kids out to get killed than his friends, but whatever. They do a little sort of modern warfare thing where they have the younger generation use their tech skills in order to infiltrate Mel Gibson's base and capture him, but then of course turn around so that they have to have the old Expendables come back and save the new Expendables, and it's just super action packed and everything's exploding and tanks and biking and sweet, ridiculous, brain numbing movie. And you should totally go see it because they don't make them like they used to, really, and it was a lot of fun. And, yeah, that's all I gotta say about it. Just crazy cast of super fun action heroes. Check it out. And the last film I'm going to talk about today is Luc Besson's Lucy, as pronounced with my pretentious French pronunciation, because I speak French, so I'm doing that, starring Scarlett Johansson. This is another sci-fi movie that Scarlett Johansson, I feel, has really pulled off, and I'm super excited to have her in sort of this sci-fi pantheon of actresses with Under the Skin, with her, and with now Lucy, and with Avengers, that she's just doing this, these cool, hardcore female characters, and she's very sexy, and she's very dangerous, and I think she's doing a great job of all these characters, so I'm excited to see her back in Lucy. I quite enjoyed the film. I think because it was so polarizing critically and for viewers, and I talked to people who really, really enjoyed it and people who didn't like it and thought it was just trying too hard. And I think in some ways it was trying fairly hard to point out social flaws in humanity while still being an action film. And I think ultimately the plot of the movie was not as important to the director as the message of the movie. What he was trying to say was less relevant than how he was trying to say it. So the premise of Lucy, if you're unfamiliar, is another one of those films that sort of, there's a couple in the 90s that came out that are about unlocking the full potential of the human brain. Because the idea is that we only use 10% of our brains, and if we used 100% of our brains, we'd be these transcendent super psychic beings. If you read a lot of I read a lot of books when I was a teenager about unlocking the brain's potential and how we can be psychic and we can be telekinetic and telepathic, and if we could just unlock more of our brains, we'd be able to do all this stuff because we're barely using any of our potential. Lucy explores this idea of what happens when she gets this drug, which is in fact a hormone manufactured by pregnant women in large doses that cause her to unlock the rest of her neural potential, and what happens to her body. They have some cool science concepts in here. They look at evolution a little bit, where we came from, where we're going, the evolution of the universe as a whole, how we need to abandon sort of a human-centric view and look more at a life-centric view. She talks about how human beings look at themselves as a unit of measure for everything, and that's incorrect. It's in fact more of a almost time unit of measure, that the fourth dimension is the most important thing, and that nothing is given any meaning without time. So matter is immaterial without time. They talk about the idea of cellular reproduction versus immortal cells and how those are different. In fact, at one point in the movie, her body starts to disassociate because her cells are unlocking individual potential and becoming immortal cells, and because she's full of this drug, her body is becoming hostile and they sort of disassociate just to pull herself back together. It's a weird sequence to happen, that she's falling apart at the cellular level, and then she sort of gains control of it, and she's able to manipulate herself at the cellular level and change everything around her. She's basically I guess she's omnipotent when she's unlocked the full potential of her brain, because she can read others' thoughts, she can control electronics, she can control her matter. She builds a supercomputer sharing the secrets of the universe, and then she just becomes one with it, I guess. She becomes everywhere at the end of the film and abandons physical form because she's transcended. So it's a fairly high concept science fiction in that way, that if you're expecting just an action movie with someone with superpowers going around and kicking butt. That's not really what you're going to get, because as soon as she gets to, I think, like maybe 40% of her unlocked potential, there's no further real need for action, because she can just do anything she wants. She just freeze time and stop people and make them all fall asleep simultaneously, so no one is a real threat to her. It's more about getting out this information that she has, and conveying information becomes the most important thing in the movie, and passing on information is the most essential thing. I think this is represented several ways in the film. First of all, like as I already sort of mentioned, is they had this discussion of immortal cells versus cells that can reproduce. And in ideal conditions, cells reproduce. They're not immortal. Now that's fairly accurate, I suppose. We do have, in fact, several immortal cells in our body. You know, cancer cells are immortal, and they're not suffering, you know, from non-ideal conditions, but rather from genetic mutations. And it's just the idea, not that these cells can live forever, they can't be killed, but rather that they have no pre-programmed point of cell death. They have no apoptosis trigger. So this idea then that being able to reproduce is a more favorable thing. So a cell in a favorable condition will reproduce. So passing on genetic information to the next generation is better than just harboring it in yourself forever and just being stagnant in yourself forever. And this sort of idea that evolution is enabled because we pass on information, we improve of generation to generation, things change over, is also an important idea about this central theme that time is the most relevant thing that we have. There's a fairly long sequence in the film that calls back certainly to 2001: Space Odyssey, wherein she's just scrolling through time very quickly. She goes to the past, she goes all the way back to the era of some terrible CG dinosaurs. She's just scrolling and transporting herself around the world, and she's reached 100% and she's seeing everything for what it is. She goes back to the past, looks at the formation of Times Square, looks at these dinosaurs, looks at the formation of the Earth. She's floating in this office chair outside the planet, just like, you know, millennial baby sort of look in 2001: Space Odyssey, space baby floating. A lot of like psychedelic colors going on and stuff. The Big Bang is shown and everything's retracting, and she's having a full understanding of all time and all everything. So she is sort of the central focus of the entire film, and she pulls it off in a way. I think she starts off like this very scared sort of party girl, then becomes like this hardcore like fighter girl because she's unlocked more potential, she has greater control over her body, and then she ultimately sort of ends up transcending emotion because she's beyond that, and that's one of the trivialities that holds us back is our feelings. She keeps around this cop that she has with her she's trying to stop this drug ring from distributing this drug. She's trying to get the drug back, basically, that gave her these powers in the first place so that she can have it and she doesn't destabilize because it's sort of holding her together. So she takes around this cop that she's trying to track down these drug kingpins and uses him as a reminder of her humanity, because apparently the more we unlock our brains, the less human we become. Which is interesting because in The Giver that I talked about, it's like the more we dull our brains, the less human we become. So apparently we're just sitting at a neurological human sweet spot, according to science fiction. So well done us. But I think it's a good movie, and I think that it is flawed, that perhaps it doesn't convey its ideas in the best way possible, but I think it definitely gets them across, and it gives you something to think about, and whether or not you agree with them, or whether or not you just sort of see them as some quirky science fiction ideas, or whether or not they help you think about things differently, I think it's important that it tries. I think it's important science fiction that it's trying to give a different view, and certainly that it's giving a non-human-centric view. And she encounters these people, and she's talking to Morgan Freeman, and he's sort of almost a voiceover feature throughout the film. He's a scientist, he's a lecturer who's trying to extrapolate what would happen at greater levels of unlocked neural potential, and she taps him because this is what's happening to her, and she's trying to convey to him the ideas that she has. And he at one point says, well, if we're not going to measure by human beings, what are we going to measure by? Just showing the egocentric nature of human beings and what we focus on and what we are primarily consumed with is ourselves, and where we sit in the plan of life and of nature and of the world, and that is not the most relevant thing. And I think the fact that the film even says that is a great thing to say. It's a great thing to examine, to say that it's it's not all about us, because even as individuals in a human society, we're very egocentric, we're very all about us, and as a social network of people all across the globe, we're certainly all about us. We were talking yesterday about the fat man, the do you push the fat man dilemma, this idea that if you have 5 people on a train track, but you can push a fat man off a bridge and stop the train and save him, do you push him? Do you take action and ruin one life in order to save 5 others, or do you remain passive and save the one man's life and are not active at all in the destruction of these 5 other people? And I said, because I'm difficult, I'm like, well, what if it was like 5 puppies? Is it still a debate? Because, we're so human-centric that it's not a debate anymore to most people, that it's just like, well, they're animals, they can die. And it's interesting that the film tackled this in a way that, like, we are just other animals like everything else. And it's kind of cool. It was a little heavy-handed with trying to make ties to the fact that the first human ancestor was named Lucy, the first female human ancestor, and then they named her Lucy, and they're like, oh, you're like the first woman, and I don't know, it was heavy-handed in those ways, but I really liked the movie. I may be overthinking it, but that's kind of what I do. I like it. I like to overthink things, so it's definitely one you should check out. And so yeah, those were kind of my big 4 summer movies that I saw in theaters. I'm going to, of course, go and see more movies, because that's what I do, and then I'll come and talk about them here with you guys. Alright, thanks. Bye. Good to be back.